Buenos dias, Barcelona. That's possibly everything I can say in Spanish. We're keeping to English for now. We will have a great panel, Shaping Esports Right, with Mike Sepso, co-founder of MLG and nowadays Senior Vice President Esports at Activision Blizzard. I think my name, of course, is Thiemo Bräutigan. I'm business reporter for Dot Esports, basically the best esports coverage online. You can check that out and make your own opinion about that. Mike, let's start. We don't have much time, and we have many topics to tackle, I think. When you co-founded MLG in 2002, things were looking differently when it comes to esports. I think that's fair to say.
Yes.
It's been 15 years now. What do you think are the most drastic, like the most important developments and things that have changed since then?
Yeah, I think just about everything has changed, so it's a tough answer. But you know, the most important things I would say, I think currently that studios and publishers have fully embraced esports as a critical part of what gaming fans want in the future of the industry. So I think it's a huge thing. When we first started, we couldn't even get a, you know, I joked while we were doing the acquisition of MLG with Bobby Kotick that I spent 10 years with nobody from Activision or Blizzard returning our phone call, and now we were part of the company. So I think that was the first major thing. The other is obviously, you know, online streaming, Twitch and YouTube, now Facebook and Twitter and the rest of the social media platforms. Obviously at MLG we built our own over-the-top streaming platform as well. So I think not needing the dependency of television distribution really helped push the sport forward tremendously and create a lot of new paradigms for player-centric and personality-centric kind of broadcasts. And then also just, you know, advertisers, major advertising brands and sponsors getting involved in figuring out how to utilize esports as a channel to reach a whole new generation of mostly millennial consumers who are not consuming media or sports in traditional ways. So I think, you know, I think a lot of people who are esports fans either weren't around or don't realize that there was a whole push to advertise in games themselves, you know, happening just about at the start of when esports was happening, and it was commercially a failure, and from a gamer's perspective, I think distracting and sort of awful. So the fact that now there's a channel for advertisers to reach gamers, but it's through a more traditional linear video medium, not disrupting the game itself.
Some people describe what you've just been talking about as the incorporation of esports. Like big companies are coming in. We've seen a lot of non-endemic brands recently, especially over the last 2 and 3 years, coming into the space. Esports has traditionally grown organically, and it's basically coming from a grassroots background. Is it a good or a bad thing, or what's good and bad about esports getting more and more incorporated?
Well, look, unlike traditional sports where you could just, you know, have a pitch and pick up a ball and there you have football or soccer, as we call it.
You know, it's soccer, by the way.
Yeah, soccer. Somebody owns the playing field, and that's always been the case since we started MLG, since Ralph and guys started ESL. You know, these are independent leagues, but we were always working with studios and publishers because it was their property that we were playing on, effectively. So I think that's always been the case, even though to the consumer and the communities that were built around these competitions and independent leagues, it felt very grassroots, but that was mostly because there was the consumer had a huge voice, right? We were very tied to lots of different social media channels and had a lot of one-on-one interaction with our fans, and we made important business decisions based on exactly what fans were saying, almost in real time sometimes. So the grassroots feel of it was effectively just the audience was a lot smaller, so everybody's voice had a lot more impact on what we were doing. I don't think that that's going to change. I think that we still spend a lot of time worried about what our fans think about just about everything that we do. And sometimes that makes us be more reserved. We don't want to say anything until we're really ready to say it. Sometimes that means we're more engaged directly with the community. But I don't think that part, which is the most important part of what we call grassroots organic development, I think that part we'll be able to keep. The potential bad parts are, depending on what you think about this, that esports has to grow up and make money one day, otherwise it's not going to be here any longer. Right? And so that's been kind of one of my messages throughout, not just because of the acquisition of MLG by Activision Blizzard, but the whole industry kind of building a bigger commercial infrastructure to push it forward. You can't have giant stadiums filled with fans and broadcasts that cost millions of dollars if you can't make some money on it. Eventually, you have to make money on it. So I don't think that is necessarily a negative thing as long as it's done well. And I think the other thing is, and this is something that happens in sort of all entertainment formats, is that the core fans who are kind of the first ones to engage and discover esports or punk rock or EDM or, there's lots of examples in music or even sports, tend to not, there's this sort of tendency to not really want newcomers to come in who, this is a huge thing in esports. Like I consistently see people, on Twitter and Reddit saying, well, if you haven't been in esports for at least a decade, you don't really belong to be here. I've been in esports for a decade and a half, and I think somebody that just became a fan yesterday is the most important thing. Like we need those people. So in some respects, it's not, I call it the punk rock effect. It's like I liked listening to Nirvana in college before anybody else did, and as soon as everybody became Nirvana fans, I hated Nirvana. They were corporate, and
it's not cool anymore.
Yeah, it's not cool. So there's definitely that effect in esports. Generally speaking, though, I think the publishers getting more deeply involved and big publishers getting more deeply involved means that there's a lot more resources in terms of money for sure, but also access and people and the capability to do things at a global level and tap into resources that we never had before. So I think that part's very good.
You said that you've become more reserved at times when it comes to speaking about plans and projects before they are ready.
And I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, I think you exactly know where this is going, and maybe everybody else is knowing where this is going as well, because I called it esports child of sorrow a few days ago in an article. Basically, the Overwatch League. It's very ambitious plans. It's highly anticipated, but we know just so little. So can you enlighten us on, you announced that you're aiming for launching the league in the third quarter of 2017, and that's basically Monday. So is Overwatch League going to launch on Monday? Are you still in this time schedule?
Yeah, I can confirm it's not launching Monday.
Okay.
Yeah, look, it's hard to have all of these negotiations with team owners and sponsors and distributors and all those things. It's hard to have all of those conversations in public because, every fan or writers, even good, responsible ones like yourself, you want to take every individual data point in real time and kind of analyze it. And without the larger context of the full story of what's going on, it's really hard to get the full picture of what's happening and why decisions are getting made. So we definitely decided to be more reserved with what we were talking about as we launched this, largely because there's a lot of people involved in launching the Overwatch League. And not there's a lot of employees of Activision Blizzard that are involved in this. There's a lot of third parties involved in it. So we've tried to maintain a good communication channel with our fan base in the industry without getting into the business of sort of being scrutinized every day for every individual decision or delay or advance or whatever. So we definitely are still on track. I would say we're going to have a lot of the elements of the league start end of Q3, not Monday. but we'll be, before the end of the year, a lot will become very, very clear, and I think everyone's going to be very happy. But there's a lot of work still going on.
But you, like, would you stick to the to your plan that you said it's going to launch in the third quarter? Of
I think you're referring to something that Nate said in an interview in Korea about October. So I don't want to provide any more detail than what the commissioner has said so far.
Nate's watching probably.
It's really and look, part of it is there's just a tremendous amount of work to do to set up a league like this. It's never the infrastructure and partners and everything required to get to this level of complexity is pretty significant. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely on schedule. You're going to see a lot of announcements, a lot of new news over the summer, and then lots of activity before the end of the year.
So, as you're probably aware of, there's also a, let's say, dark side to this.
Let's not say dark side.
I'm wearing Star Wars socks. I'm referring to the dark side right now. So, like many team owners, like there are a lot of endemic brands, known brands like TSM, Fnatic, Team Dignitas, etc., which have recently dropped their Overwatch rosters. A lot of them citing the lack of information and as the main reason. How do you feel responsible for that?
Not personally. No, I think, look, in some cases, I think that was largely because I think the fact that happened was spun a lot of different ways, again, sort of without the full context of what was going on. But I think it was largely due to the fact that we made a decision to spend most of our time and resources preparing this big new league for our wildly successful new game, not to take a lot of that attention off of setting up the Overwatch League to kind of start a whole organic system that would then get overlapped by the Overwatch League when it launched. So the end result of that was there's just not a lot of competitive activity, there's not a lot of tournaments to go to and things like that in the time before we actually launched the league. So it didn't make a ton of sense to keep all of those teams on when there wasn't a lot for them to do. But I think for some of the teams it was a little bit of a negotiating tactic to go public with that in the way that some of them did. But what I can tell you is that there are just as many endemic esports teams involved in the process of franchising for Overwatch League teams as there are traditional sports organizations.
There was this dispute, so to speak, that like Activision Blizzard actually would prefer non-endemics over endemics. Like, what's your reply to that?
That's definitely not what's happening, and I don't think that anybody in the company ever said that. If anybody had, they probably would have pinned it on me because I'm been that guy before. But no, I think look, at the end of the day, this is a Blizzard game, right? There isn't another publisher in the world that's been as focused on developing an organic esports system as Blizzard has been for over 15 years now. So that's just not the case.
The reported entry fees or the bidding process, like there were some figures which were publicly thrown around which were pretty high, so to speak. If that's the case, isn't it basically preventing endemic orgs from getting in without help?
Is it preventing them from getting in without? And by help, you mean?
Like investors, bigger sports clubs.
Yeah, so obviously we haven't made any public declarations about what the price is, and we won't.
You're good to go.
I'm not going to today. But what I will say is that before we decided to announce, at BlizzCon last year was where we really first publicly announced the plans for the Overwatch League and had both endemic and traditional sports organizations there to kind of see a full review of all the information. Before we ever did that, lots of the big endemic esports teams that you're talking about had already been raising money and building out, a capital base and things like that. So I think that was only natural. I don't think that the way that we've structured the Overwatch League has caused endemic organizations, for no other reason except the Overwatch League, to go out and try to get partners or raise capital or anything like that. But what I will say is that the ambition for this league, I think, is bigger than anything that I've certainly seen before in esports, and I think I've been around since not quite day one, but almost. And it will require partners with not only expertise in esports team management, but with resources, capital, human, and otherwise, to really dig in and build this thing.
I mean, that's probably true for the esports industry in general, right? Like the whole incorporation thing is also about getting non-endemic expertise into the scene, like maturing process, so to say. I think, like, related to that, one of the big trends we're seeing, and probably which is also something which we will see with Overwatch League, are like broadcasting deals and TV deals. Do esports need TV, or does TV need esports?
I think you just have to look at the public facts to realize that esports doesn't need TV. I've had this, tweeted at me for over a decade now, but when are you going to put esports on TV so it's a real thing? We actually did our first TV deal at MLG in 2005, so we had a whole season on the highest rated cable network available in the US 10 years ago. That didn't do anywhere near as much for us as building our own over-the-top network did, for instance, either financially or in terms of development of a fan base. So I think, there's just, especially in the Western world and more so in Asia now, I think recently, there's less focus for consumers in general, especially young consumers, the kind of core demographic of esports fans. They're just not watching as much television. Half the staff, I would say, if not more, in our New York office at MLG has never had cable in their own home, never had cable or satellite television. So I think that's telling. It's like, how do you even go find this? And I think the E-League was a great case of that, right? You had great distribution on one of the top sports networks in North America and significantly more viewership on Twitch. So I just think it's sort of a natural trend that's not even necessarily anything to do with esports. It's just that's sort of where the world is heading. The more interesting question to me, I think, is your second one, is does TV need esports? I think they desperately need younger viewers. I don't know if esports can solve that. I think it's tough to imagine people just all of a sudden waking up and deciding that they're going to get a satellite TV system or cables just so that they can watch lots of esports. It's all already available in a much more native environment. So I think the two just don't really play well together, except for maybe individual circumstances where a heavily promoted, internationally broadcast kind of television-driven deal can expose esports to newer audiences. Then I think it could be very valuable to both, to the rights owner and the distributor. I think that Turner probably saw a much younger audience tune into E-League than they've ever had for an NBA broadcast or anything else that was in that time slot before. So it will work. It will help television hold on to a younger audience for longer. But I think just television as it's currently constructed, there's no one that can really save it. It's going to change.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions or pitfalls that non-endemics especially face when they want to enter esports?
Sure. There's a lot. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things to me is always that people, especially from traditional television and traditional sports, when they think esports, the first thing they want to do is see a sports title as the most popular esport. I don't know why they leap to that immediately, but they think like FIFA or NBA or Madden or something. They want to see, okay, if it's esports, you must be playing sports games. And in 15 years, I've never seen a sports game. I think FIFA still is the one that has the biggest sort of online audience watching.
A lot of casuals, so like.
Yeah, it's a very casual thing, and it doesn't have the level of competition of an Overwatch or a Call of Duty or any of the other major titles out there. So I think that's a classic mistake that people make. I think the other is what we just discussed, that you automatically think, okay, I'm from the traditional sports and media world. I'm going to take this content and put it on television, and then it's going to be huge. And the reality is, like, that audience doesn't have television, so they're not going to find it. So there's a few things like that. And then I think one of the interesting paradigm shifts from traditional sports to esports is how important celebrating the player really is. Like even in traditional sports, obviously, it's all about drama, and it's in many ways kind of soap operas for men, right? We want to see drama, and we want to see individual superstars, and you have heroes and villains and all that kind of stuff. You have that in esports, but everybody is accessible. Everybody's on social media. Everybody's got YouTube and Twitch and whatever else they're streaming on, or Facebook, and you have kind of 24/7 access to these stars, and you see everything about them. And so they're not as well manicured and cultivated a public personality as you have in traditional sports. And I think that frightens people a lot too, that there's a total lack of control. Like even with a superstar like LeBron James, the Cavaliers and the NBA have a lot of control over his public persona. And you don't really have that in esports. And that's a function of it being a young sport, but also the accessibility of the players themselves to their fans.
You slightly touched the topic of the esports audience, and something which is pretty astounding to me is that somehow Overwatch, coming back to this game, is reaching a new audience. Like especially we're seeing in Korea when it comes to the Apex League from OGN, that the amount of female fans is huge. And comparatively bigger even than something like League of Legends, which of course is also very popular among female fans already, but even bigger. Why is that? How come Overwatch is the game that's doing that?
I think partly because it's a new game, right? So it's creating a whole new fan base too. But also, I think Blizzard games and Blizzard's focus on community has always been a much more open environment. If you've ever been to BlizzCon, you can see it's one of the gaming events that is as diverse as I think any other out there. And it's really Blizzard fans and Blizzard's focus on building a big, safe community to kind of celebrate who you are in their games and their games and the IP behind it. And I think that's a huge part of it. Blizzard's really done an amazing job in this industry, which can be kind of overly male and overly kind of online aggressive and all those kind of things. Blizzard's done a fantastic job for years of cultivating a very kind of open, non-judgmental community that's inclusive of a bigger, more diverse audience than typically found in other games. We also have great female heroes in the game, and
I was just wanting to talk about that. Like, if you take a look at a character like Tracer, for example, in esports, in Overwatch, where you decided to basically out her with a comic, with this wonderful scene where she's kissing her girlfriend, and like I remember that the whole social media sphere like it blew up basically.
Right.
Is that is it also is it a marketing move? Is it PR gag, or is that really you're standing behind that we want to put this message out of everybody is included?
Yeah, look. That's really a question for the studio and
sure.
the team that spends, most of their lives making and managing a great game and a great community. But I will say that, from my time, many years as a partner to Blizzard and now being a part of the team, it is one of the most kind of inclusive, community-based cultures I've ever seen. So I would never, even as an outsider, I would never imagine that it was as cynical as a marketing move. I think that almost everything that comes from, everything really that comes from Blizzard, those teams pour their kind of heart and soul into making these games. But not just not just making and launching the games, but then the community too, right? I mean, BlizzCon is a celebration of fans that takes enormous efforts every year, lots of money and lots of people to put on, and it's really an investment and kind of a big thank you to the fan base. So,
okay, maybe let's get back to something you're more comfortable on, aside from the game itself. Esports and a franchised model. We know that Overwatch League is going to be franchised. We know that it's going to have geographic locals.
Right.
All these things are very much established in the United States and in NA sports, basically. But we're from Europe. We basically don't understand franchised leagues. So why is a team that is not performing not getting kicked out of the league? We love relegation, right? So how can a franchise model carry over to Europe? Because I mean, Overwatch League is going to be global.
Yes.
And I expect it to be franchised globally. So how are you going to do that?
Look, there was a tremendous amount of debate at the fundamental level about how we would construct all of the professional leagues. Focus obviously on Overwatch League first, but at the highest level of the company. And it was a very healthy debate because there's great attributes to both kinds of systems. I think underlying the decision to make it a fixed franchise system was the idea that we really want partners as team owners who feel confident that they can continue to invest in building up their players as stars, to really celebrate who those players are, and build a big, significant local business in the markets that they own the rights to. And I think that while it may lack interesting, dramatic story parts, throughout some seasons when there are teams relegated or new teams come in, I think even in major leagues across Europe, in football leagues especially, where relegation exists, it's still pretty rare. And what we felt was with the launch,
basically happens every season. So
there's a storyline to it, but the big franchises are still the big franchises, and so we thought that this model would work on a global basis, especially for the formation of a new league, right? Where we really are asking partners to invest quite a lot of time and resources into helping to build the league by focusing on their local market. And we wanted them to feel secure that their investment would pay off over time.
Do you really believe that, speaking about geographic locals, like city teams basically, do you really believe that, assuming that they will play at home and like in traditional sports, do you really believe that you can fill arenas and stadiums with this approach? Do you think the audience is there, like the local geographic audience? Is it possible to fill Camp Nou with esports fans?
I think it will be, for sure. I think that's where this industry is heading. And I think we're making an extremely ambitious push to kind of leap ahead. In some ways, I think this is a sort of self-fulfilling ambition, right? It's not going to happen unless somebody pushes it. And who better than Activision Blizzard to do that?
But then again, like esports fans are different from many sports fans in terms of like them being very internationally orientated.
Sure.
And as well as like research shows that many esports fans tend more towards being loyal to individuals, to players and individual stars,
right,
and less so much to teams. So how can that work?
Well, I think that's the history of esports. It's not necessarily the future, right? And I think one of the things that we kept front of mind when thinking about the early stage of development of the Overwatch League and future leagues was it's a balance of like we started to talk about earlier. It's the sort of punk rock thing, right? Like how do you keep the current audience engaged and excited and reward the core fans who have been supportive of esports for a long time, but also how do you develop new fans? How do you get people that don't necessarily play the games interested in watching? And I think that's a big reason why we felt that the local market, owning a market for a franchise is a really critical thing, because they can kind of stay in that market and promote the league and the team and those personalities to a single base. You don't have then every team trying to create a global fan base all the time, which is very difficult. Easy in a hyper rapid early adopter kind of model, which has been what's powered esports, I think, till now. What we're talking about is kind of, how do we get people that are not necessarily gamers involved in this? How do we get, and then how do we create systems where team owners and organizations can invest in a market and really build up a brand and build up personalities and like that. So I think we're trying to set up a structure that will take esports into the future without harming or diminishing any of the strengths of what got it here. There's nothing in this new system that limits you from being a fan of any team in the world, right? I live in and grew up in near New York City. I've been a Dallas Cowboys fan since I was 5 years old. My dad hates it, right? But it's a thing, and it was largely because I really loved the brand and the personality of that team when I was a kid growing up, and now I'm excited because they have a hot new team and it's a great roster, and that's going to be very cool. I am never going to live in Dallas, ever. Nothing against Texas, but it's just not my scene. But I think that it doesn't limit the capability for fans to be fans of any team all over the world or any personalities or even players on two different teams. But it does give us the opportunity to create new platforms to bring new fans into the system.
So you're talking about basically shaping esports right in the future.
Sure.
We've talked a little bit about the past and the developments that led us here. What do you think are the biggest trends and developments coming over the next, 3 or 4 years?
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's still early stages for the publishers to be as involved as they are in esports. I think the great thing is over the past couple of years, studios have gotten more involved. So I think we're going to see a lot of new games being built specifically for esports. I was at E3 earlier this month, and in the 10 years that I've been going to that conference, I've never seen such a focus on esports. Esports was everywhere. It was the top of mind for every conversation that was going on. And so I think the industry has finally embraced it. And when we started MLG 15 years ago, for the first probably 7 or 8 years, the sports industry and the sports media world understood what we were trying to do immediately. The video game industry, like I said earlier, barely returned our phone calls. The video game press didn't cover us. The sports press did. I could get a meeting at ESPN, within 24 hours at any time for the first 5 years we were in existence in MLG. I couldn't get a meeting at Xbox or Activision Blizzard or anywhere else. So now that the industry has really fully embraced it and sees it as a critical part of the future of the industry, I think a tremendous amount of great innovation and new exciting things will come from that. I think the next wave after that that's going to be really critically important, and it's sort of on us to help guide this, is that all media businesses inherently somehow depend on advertising, right? Especially the sports media business. You have sponsors and you have advertisers and you have a need to integrate those things and to provide return on investment for those supporters of your business. And that really hasn't happened at scale yet. We've seen some non-endemics come into the industry. I think the endemic, the equipment manufacturers and everything like that have really got it, and they've seized on it, and they're getting a tremendous amount of return on investment. Now we have to really translate to the big international consumer brands who really spend the most, the car makers, the insurance providers, all of those big industries that are huge advertisers globally in other forms of media. have to start looking at their spending and saying, why am I spending so much money on television? Nobody under 40 is watching what I'm putting my advertising in front of. And I think esports is a tremendous channel for that. It's just very difficult for outsiders to understand at this point. And that guided a lot of decisions about formation of the Overwatch League too. It's just how can we make this more recognizable and understandable for outsiders to really get a handle on. But I think that next wave, and I'm very hopeful that we'll lead that, is going to be a lot about just sort of guiding major advertisers into this space and helping them not make inauthentic moves that will alienate audiences, but really embrace this. And part of that means we have to create new models for sponsorship and advertising. Probably the same old 30-second commercial isn't going to work as well as it would in a traditional television broadcast. So we need to rethink a lot of those models.
Probably part of the reason why many of these young folks left television.
Exactly. So I think that's going to be the next critical thing. So I think the most important thing that's happening in the industry right now, and I would say for the past kind of 18 to 24 months, and probably will be critically important for the next couple of years, is that the industry, studios and publishers, have fully embraced esports. I don't think that there's anybody out there who is sort of could dismiss esports at this point. And for 13 of the 15 years I've been in this business, that was the case. The industry was pretty dismissive of it. Now it's a really important thing.
Do you think it's that we reached a break it or make it point?
No, I don't think so. Because I think a lot of people who are looking at esports in the window of the past couple of years, 2-3 years maximum, haven't seen the prior decades that went into building the communities and fan bases and infrastructures that still support what's going on. There's definitely room to make mistakes, and the whole industry will make mistakes. There's no way to be perfect as we evolve this thing, but the system the systems that's in place, the fan bases and the ecosystems that are here today, will continue to support it. And the publishers in the industry, especially getting behind it, mean that there will be continued support for it. It's really, it's not a fad, and it's not a single technical innovation that may not develop to its full hoped potential. It's kind of core DNA in the industry now.
Do you think, like, it's directly related to that question basically, but do you think, many people say so, we're in a bubble or going to be in a bubble?
I've seen the esports bubble before a couple of times. It was much smaller than that, so I don't think this is more like a wave than a bubble. I think we'll have, it'll be more or less exciting, and there'll be more or less headlines over time. But I mean, thinking about it, like we just started talking about Overwatch League last November at BlizzCon. It's just the end of June now, and you're already criticizing me for not releasing enough information, right?
That's what I'm supposed to do, right?
But that's a point. There's a lot of attention on this. I think the attention is good, and I think there will be a lot of change and innovation and a lot of progress that the whole industry will pursue. And I think that we're starting to lead that now, and I think that it'll be good for the industry. I think that it's off to the right track, and it's again in taking the time to creating the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about creating, and requiring our partners to have resources to be able to follow through on that promise. We're creating a sustainable ecosystem. We're not creating something that we just want to capitalize on for the next year or two. This is a core part of the future of this business.
Aside from the Overwatch League, which is, I mean, of course, probably one of the biggest things in Activision Blizzard going on right now, do you have anything exciting to tell us when it comes to other games and other esports within your umbrella?
Yeah, look, I think the Call of Duty World League is the other very exciting thing that we're working on, really 24/7 at MLG and inside of Activision. It's for traditionalist esports, and I think this is where Ralph and Jens and Sundance and I, between ESL and MLG, disagreed for many years, is that we wanted esports to be inclusive of every type of gaming. consoles included,
Mhm.
and we've never been really PC elitists in that sense. Although there's a lot of reasons why PCs are fantastic for esports. I do think that the more sort of mainstream kind of living room accessible side of that market is important as an aspect of the overall esports mix. And I think it's Call of Duty in particular, as the biggest, most successful video game franchise in the history of the industry, is really an important entry point for new esports fans to come in, because it's rare that you talk to anyone sort of, with between 10 and 40 or 50 that hasn't heard of Call of Duty and knows that it's a game. You might not have played it, but you know it's there. It's a huge game, wildly accessible, and I think the next version of it that's coming out that we just announced at E3 is going to be fantastic, and I think the studio spent a tremendous amount of time really making sure that the attributes that were built for esports were there. And the nice part is a lot of that development cycle happened after the MLG acquisition, so we got to work with that studio quite a bit.
I think I'd like to open the discussion to the audience if there are any questions. I don't know if that's supposed to happen, but I would love to do that.
Sure.
Maybe one question before he's probably getting a microphone. Maybe one question for me to you is, how many of you consider yourself esports fans? And now something confusing as a follow-up, how many of you consider themselves vegetarians? Okay, maybe you can elaborate on that a little later. Yeah, apparently. Like there was a CNN article Mike just told me about where they were asking basically how many people are vegetarians worldwide. And people were answering, I don't know, maybe 15%, 20%, 30%. And actually CNN numbers say that it's just 5%. And so Mike said, well, we basically have as many esports fans worldwide as we have vegetarians, if that's true. So. Please, your question.
Actually, it's two questions. First, at the beginning of your speech, you were referring to the current eSport clubs as endemic. Why do you call them endemic? I would like to know more about that. And second, talking about the Overwatch League, you were referring about a global league and then local leagues. Will these local leagues will be something also owned by Blizzard or whatever, or will you partner with the current local leagues, like in Spain, the LDP, or other leagues in Germany or ESL, something like that? What is the future for Overwatch with these leagues? Thank you.
Okay. So the first question, why do we call esports organizations endemic? It's just an easy way to refer to organizations that are specifically esports organizations and don't also, for instance, own a soccer or basketball team. So we kind of divide up teams and sponsors as endemic or non-endemic, meaning gaming headsets like Razer and Astro are endemic sponsors. They don't also make basketball equipment. So it's an easy way to define things. I don't think it's 100% accurate all the time, but that's the reasoning behind it. So that we can have these conversations and not spend 10 minutes defining what the difference is between Cloud9 and Manchester United. I think that's mostly the reason. The second question, I think you were asking if the Overwatch League will continue to work with kind of localized leagues around the world. And when we're talking about Overwatch League, we're really just talking about the top professional element of it on a global basis. Any professional league, esports or traditional sports, requires a tremendous amount of talent development, which with many sports starts, with young children. And there's a lot of infrastructure created between the very early stages all the way up to professional leagues. So we're really just, I think for the subject of this interview, we're really just talking about the Overwatch League as the top professional tier of that. There's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of partnerships and a lot of development in local leagues and things like that that'll happen underneath that as kind of a pyramid system that leads up to that. We have this Contenders League. We've started a number of things, the Overwatch World Cup, to try to kind of foster that environment. So it won't just be Blizzard, the Overwatch League, and the team owners that are a part of that larger community. It'll be massive when it really gets up and running.
Do I have another question? Someone? Ah, yeah, up there.
Yeah, like right now for sports being transmitted right now, there are some like pay-per-view services like you need actually to pay to watch them. Do you see esports going this way in some future, like near or far or whatever? Do you think this is possible? Do you think this is happening?
So basically talking about subscription
Pay-per-view,
models.
yeah. Look, I think everything's on the table. I think what we'd like to do as sort of an organizing principle is offer as much choice as possible to consumers. So, there's no plan for that kind of a service today that I can talk about. But I guess hypothetically in the future, if we want to create as much choice for our consumers as possible, some consumers might not like having advertising in their broadcasts, and they may want additional services like data services or other things that go along with the broadcast, and we could potentially offer that as a subscription or pay-per-view model. So I think, we're studying and hiring people from the broad spectrum of the sports world to help us to kind of round out that offering, and we're working with third-party partners all the time too. I think the interesting part about esports is, the broadcast itself can combine real-time data that's coming out of the game, and it can also include in-game items and services too. So I think there's aspects of esports that are not available or an option in traditional sports that we also don't want to overlook and just tie ourselves too much to the traditional sports models.
Thank you for your question. Is there another one? I don't see that. Okay, I don't think that's the case. So I think then it's up to me to say thank you very much for coming over here. I know that you're still pretty jet lagged, but I think you did well.
Thank you, Thiemo.
Yeah, and have a nice day, and thanks for having us.
Thank you.